What do other countries have to do with US debt? The debt in the US, public debt, recently passed $40 trillion, and lots of people are getting worried. But I don't think, even if it went to like 100 trillion, the actual number doesn't really matter, as how it's going to be balanced with revenues. That is, does the government have enough money to keep on rolling the debt? Because that's basically how government debt really works. Debt never really gets repaid, not by any government, at least not completely. So I think that the important question is whether the US government can really roll over the debt. Because as of now, the demand this year for treasury bonds and bills has been down, and that has made the interest rates go up. The question would be, what effect does the dynamics happening in the US with respect to public debt, what does that have to do with other countries? Maybe a good starting point would be to consider who really owns US government debt, i.e., who are the holders of the bonds that the US government issued. And I think it's pretty amazing if you look at it, because a lot of the bonds are held domestically. That is, 76% of all the bonds are held by US citizens, not by foreigners. So that's a pretty interesting thing, considering that how big the United States is and how connected it is to other markets. So that's an interesting point. Only about 24% is owned by foreigners, and of the 24%, we have Japan, UK, and China as the major holders. And Japan holds about $1 trillion, which is a very tiny portion of the whole debt stock. So, and UK has about $1 trillion as well, and China about $500 billion. So the debt is fairly it's not concentrated on one creditor. So I think that also given the fact that the US dollar is the reserve currency, and lots of people in the world um you know want to hold it, and lots of people in the world want to hold it. I think the demand is not declining so bad. Things could be worse, and I think that maybe there'll be no crisis really soon, really, unless something like a really bad dramatic event happens, something in the order of COVID. But I don't see anything happening that is likely to make the demand fall drastically, although it has reduced, which has led to increasing yields. And that has the additional effect of making other countries raise their interest rates. So you might find that if US yields have risen because demand has fallen, you might find that other countries also raise interest rates so that their bonds are more attractive than the treasuries, because US is considered the most trusted safe asset, right? But that isn't going to be true for too long. And here's the reason. See, as the government owes more people money, at some point people will begin having doubt in the government's capability to repay them, at least repay them in a way that makes sense. Because once the government runs out of money, when the the deficit gets too large, that deficit has to be funded by borrowing even more. At some point, the amount of interest, if you look at how interest payments are growing, at some point interest rates will have interest payments will push away other budget items. That could be something like social security. So you might find that interest payments have grown too massive, that basically all taxes being paid are going to interest. So like one option the US government has there is to borrow even more, which makes the public debt worse, right? Another option is to cut down on spending, uh, maybe, but that is very politically hard to do, because you can't just say that you're not going to pay social security for people. People worked hard, and that's their retirement money, so it has to be paid, as well as other programs, cutting on defense, at such a moment when like the US is in major conflicts with other countries. So cutting down budgets, that's a really difficult thing. The third option that the US can do is print money. So print lots of money, and that has the effect of flooding the world with dollars. And the meaning of that is that dollars become very cheap, and the dollar becomes weaker because it's been overprinted basically. And this has happened for I think all reserve currencies in the past, where by government is straddled with lots of external debt, and it has those three options, and most often it will resort to printing of money, right? And when it prints money, it devalues its own currency. The currency gets weaker, and then you'll find that the dollar has ceased to be a good currency. People don't want to buy it anymore. I'm not sure that China would be a good reserve currency as of now, because they have very strong capital controls. You, I don't imagine it being a strong reserve currency, and it's not as though uh, the government of China really wants it to be a reserve currency. So it appears that we'll have a reserve currency that is very much devalued, unless China makes a move here and maybe opens up its own capital accounts and allows its currency to be freely traded by people. So that's something maybe one can try and watch. Another consequence of the US dollar dynamics is that countries that want to borrow from the US or in dollars will have a hard time paying back that debt, because the interest rates are like high, right? You'll find when the interest rates are high, and that might they might find it good when they might find it like really good if the dollar weakens, but the interest rates being high mean that countries will have to pay more amounts in terms of dollars, and that's not really good. It's not really good thing. It might be have been better if they borrowed at low interest rates. So the debt is very much unlikely to be paid back, and governments throughout history have always used debt rollover, which basically means this: you have a government, it has borrowed, let's say, 1 trillion this year, and then that debt comes due next year. For example, for argument's sake, what it does next year is it borrows more money in order to pay back this debt. And every government does that basically. And let's hope that nothing bad is going to happen, because if every government is doing that at once, then where is the money coming from? And they do that in increasing amounts, so it might be a worrisome trend. And so maybe the best we can see is wait and see what comes out of it. If you're liking this video, please press that like button. And what is it that you think the consequences of the US debt hitting 40 trillion are?